Have you ever just stopped and wondered, what makes me, well, me? Today, we are diving deep into psychology, the science that's all about asking those huge questions about our own minds and behaviors. Why do we think the way we think, feel the way we feel, and do the things we do? Let's get into it.
So it really all boils down to this one simple but massive question. A question you've probably asked yourself a million times, right? Why did I just say that? Why do I keep putting this off? Why am I feeling this way? That curiosity, that is the engine that drives the entire field of psychology.
You know, long before we had labs, and brain scans, and experiments, the journey to understand the human experience, well, that belonged to the philosophers. For thousands of years, they were the ones wrestling with the big mysteries of the mind. And that ancient quest, it basically laid all the groundwork for everything that came next.
But there was a huge challenge right from the start. I mean, think about it. How do you scientifically study something you can't see, something you can't measure? Concepts like the soul or even the mind are so deeply personal and internal. This was the fundamental hurdle that psychology had to figure out how to jump over to become a real science.
And that journey is just fascinating. The field kind of started out as the science of the soul. But how do you put a soul under a microscope? You can't, so that was pretty quickly dismissed as unscientific. Then the focus shifted to the science of the mind. You know, our feelings, our thoughts, but that's super subjective, right? My experience of happiness is totally different from yours. So this pushed the pendulum way over to the other extreme, the science of behavior, which only looked at what you could see people do. But that felt like it was missing the whole point, ignoring our rich inner world. And that's how we get to today, where modern psychology finally brings it all together, studying both our behavior and our mental processes.
Now, that move to just studying behavior, that wasn't just some small tweak. Oh no. It was a complete revolution that totally redefined the field and really put it on the path to being seen as a legitimate science.
And this revolution had a name: behaviorism. Thinkers like J.B. Watson basically came in and said, look, if you can't see it and you can't measure it, it has no place in science. For them, psychology had to be all about observable actions and responses, stuff you could actually write down and record objectively. It was a really critical, if maybe a little extreme step in making psychology the rigorous discipline it is today.
But of course, we're not just a bunch of robots simply responding to things, are we? We think, we feel, we dream. We have this whole inner universe going on. And that's exactly where modern psychology landed. It took the best of both worlds, understanding that to really get the full picture of a person, you have to study both the outside, our visible actions, our behavior, and the inside, our thoughts, our emotions, all those mental processes.
Okay, so speaking of the modern field, let's clear up something that trips a lot of people up. What's the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist? Here's the key takeaway. Psychiatrists are medical doctors. They're MDs, which means they can prescribe medication. Psychologists, on the other hand, primarily focus on things like therapy and understanding behavior, and they generally don't prescribe meds. Simple as that.
So how do psychologists actually go about studying our minds and behavior? Well, they use a scientific method that's built around 4 core goals. It's a really neat framework for how they make their discoveries.
And this isn't just some simple linear checklist. It's way more dynamic than that. It's a continuous, interconnected process. Just look at this graphic. It's an infinity loop, which is perfect because it shows how each goal flows right into the next, creating this constantly refining cycle of understanding.
Let's break it down real quick. First up is description, just observing and taking notes on what's going on. Next is explanation, trying to come up with a theory for why it's happening. Then you've got prediction. Okay, based on my theory, what do I think is going to happen next? And finally, control. How can we actually influence or change the behavior? Just think about trying to break a bad habit. First, you describe it, then you try to explain why you do it, you predict when you're most likely to do it, and then finally, you take steps to control it. See? It's a natural process.
And here's a foundational rule, a really important one. As a science, psychology only deals with the natural world, things that can be observed and tested, through our senses. It doesn't get into supernatural explanations, simply because you can't scientifically verify them. This goes right back to that long journey away from its philosophical roots in studying the soul.
All right, so with all these scientific tools, where is psychology actually being used? The answer is pretty much everywhere. It goes so far beyond that classic image of a therapist's office.
I mean, just look around. Psychologists are in big corporations, making workplaces better. They're in schools, helping students learn more effectively. They're in courtrooms working as forensic experts. And of course, they're in research labs, constantly pushing the boundaries of what we know about the human brain. Its principles are literally everywhere.
And the sheer variety of specialties in the field is just incredible. I mean, we all know about clinical psychology for mental health, but there's also industrial organizational psychology for the workplace, health psychology that links our minds to our physical health, and even forensic psychology for the legal system. The applications are just so incredibly broad.
So look, if you remember just one thing from all this, let it be the number 2. Because at its very core, psychology is the science of 2 fundamental parts of who we are: our behavior, all the things we do, and our mental processes, all the things we think and feel.
You know, this quote really just wraps up the entire journey we've been talking about perfectly. It started as this abstract philosophical quest that, struggled to be taken seriously as a science. And over time, it evolved into this really rigorous discipline that beautifully combines the study of our actions and our inner world.
And all of that leaves us with one final, and maybe the most crucial thought. The goals of psychology are to describe, to explain, to predict, and ultimately to influence behavior. That's a lot of power. And the question it leaves us with is this: how do we choose to use that power, and for what purpose?